I'd like to introduce you to a longtime friend of mine this morning. I've known Brent for a long time. I went to middle school with Brent. I went to high school with Brent. I went to college with Brent. I've worked with Brent. I've gone to church with Brent. I've raised kids with Brent. You may know Brent as well. This is not a real person. It's a character from a TV show, but the trope is one that we have all known at different points in our life. Brent is a terrible person, and he's a terrible person to be around. This particular Brent is a character from the 4th season of a show called The Good Place. It was on NBC in the last 5 years or so. It was not a Christian show. It did not have a Christian vision for the afterlife, but it certainly borrowed from the Christian vision of heaven and hell. But the series creator, who had worked on Saturday Night Live and The Office and Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Parks and Rec and some of these shows the last 20 years, wanted to ask the question with this show, what makes a good person? What makes a good life? And so he teamed up with a professor of moral philosophy, and they wrote this show about what does it mean to be a good person. And the basic concept of the show is that 4 main characters wake up after their death in what is called the good place. And it is like heaven. It's perfect, and everything's catered around you, and you have a tailored and peaceful afterlife. There's also rumors of a place called the bad place. And the good place and the bad place are really the results of an algorithm. They measure everything you've ever done in your life, good or bad, and assign a point value based on how good or bad it was. And so if you have reached a certain point criteria, you get to go to the good place for your afterlife. And if you meet that threshold, you go to the bad place where you are tortured. So the show starts with 4 people waking up in the good place, only they all know that they're not the person the good place thinks that they are. And so all of them who have been utterly terrible people all of their life all have to figure out how to pretend to be good so that they don't get found out and sent to the bad place. This is essentially what this show is about. And they eventually find out that what has happened is that the good place that they are in is actually the bad place, but the way they've tortured them is to try to make bad people pretend to put on a facade of good, and they are miserable. And they make each other miserable. And so there's 4 seasons of this, about 60 episodes, all a half hour. It is not a Christian vision of how it's all going to end, and it never means to be, but it does ask some pretty good questions that Christians have wrestled with about the afterlife and then also the life that we're in now. So what the problem that brings Brent about is that all 4 of the main characters all make clear personal development in their torturing in the afterlife. They all are demonstratively becoming better people who care more about themselves now. And this throws the algorithm into absolute chaos. And the question starts getting asked in the afterlife is, can people still become better after that they die? And what does it mean to be better? And what does it mean to be good? And how do we move from bad to good? And these questions are asked over and over and over in some fascinating ways. But the point that the 4 want to make is that they think anyone can become better. And so the last season is about putting 4 really terrible people into the mix to see if even they can improve and come to a sense of awareness that they have been bad, and if then they can become good. And so Brent is one of these terrible people. And Brent is really terrible. So terrible, in fact, that on a show in prime time, which has a clear threshold of what can and cannot be shown, this is not HBO or Cinemax, right? I still wasn't entirely sure that I wanted to show some of his videos on Sunday morning. Like, that's how terrible of a character he is. And so I'm going to give you a couple of his quotes, though, just to give you an idea of the sort of arrogance and lack of self-reflection in him, and see if you've met this guy in your life like I have as well. Brent is introducing himself, and he says that on earth he ran a family business that he inherited. He ran it for 18 years. He got it from his dad. It was called Norwalk Materials. That was his last name. In 18 years, he grew Norwalk Materials from a $90 million company to a $94 million company in 18 years. If you know anything about money or math, that is far less than just inflation over 18 years. So he actually stagnated the company, but it was celebrating himself as a big deal. One time he's quoted as saying, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who I personally believe was a great man, he said that when life knocks you on your butt, you just jump back up and start throwing haymakers. And someone said, I'm not sure that Martin Luther King Jr. said that. Brent said, no, he did. You're wrong. He also said, one time I did shots with a pilot in the lounge and the guy let me fly his helicopter. And the person who's in charge of his afterlife says, yeah, Brent, we know. That's how you died. Then as he comes aware to his death, you think most people, when they die and come to this afterlife awareness, there's a moment of mourning, like, oh, I had more to do, I had more to say. What is death going to look like? When Brent wakes up and he comes to awareness that he dies, he says, oh, well, maybe that's not so bad, because there was a pesky journalist starting to poke around at some of my former secretaries. He was a bad guy. And he drove everyone around him crazy. And so the person who created the show was asked why they wrote this character, why they wrote this person that so needled other people. And this is what he says, and this is really help us think about where we're heading in this sermon. He says, we weren't really interested in telling a redemption story with Brent. He was the kind of person that he is, and it's a very prominent trope in the Western world today. And it's not that he's irredeemable. I wouldn't say that anyone is irredeemable. But the whole problem with people like him is they never get self-reflective enough or introspective enough to even allow for the possibility of redemption, because they don't think they're doing anything wrong. That's the frustrating thing. And when we're sitting around thinking about what kind of people the bad place could put into this experiment that would really foul things up, that was the perfect model for one such person. Because in order to become a better person, you have to believe that you have weaknesses and flaws. You have to look inside yourself and consider your actions and think about how there could even be something better that you might be able to do. And people like Brent, and you don't have to look very far in our world today to find people like these, don't feel like they have to do that. They think they are amazing. Eleanor, one of the characters, says that he's born on third base and thought that he invented the game of baseball. That is the problem with people like Brent. Everything they do in their minds is perfect. And so when I conceived of this idea of this sermon series that we're going to do over the next couple weeks, I thought, well, everyone wants to grow. That's the foundation of where I started. Everyone from where they're at wants to grow. And then I started thinking, as I got a little more nervous, as we got a little more close to Sunday, not everyone really does want to grow. Some people are distinctly content where they're at, either because they think they have it all, or because they just bask in mediocrity, or because it sounds painful and they don't know which way to go from here. Not everyone wants to grow, and so that really made me question the premise of this whole sermon. And so I'm going to start by asking you into this series, do you want to grow? Are you at a point in your life where there are things that you can actually recognize that you're not particularly adept at, that you want more of, that you want to build character, that you want to build strength, that you want to build friendships, that you want to build marriages, that you want to build your parenting capacity. Do you actually want to grow? Because that question is deeply important for everything else we're going to build on in this sermon and the rest of the way. And like I said, there are many different ways to grow. You could intend to grow as a Christian, or you could want to grow as a person. You could want to grow as a spouse, as a parent, as an employee, as a leader, as a player, or an athlete. If you want to grow, there are a couple things you need in order to grow. And the first is represented to us in this character, Brent. In order to grow, you have to have a willingness to accept that you are not perfect. And I feel really comfortable saying that because you're not perfect. I'm not talking about the person next to you. Don't look at your husband. You are not perfect. And if you think you are, or you even act like you are very difficult to live with. You are not perfect. You don't see things clearly. You don't always make the right call. You do not know everything. And you can be very hard to live with and get along with. The first step towards growing is recognizing this and admitting it. Now, that's not to say that you aren't great. You're great. You really are. You're great as you are, and you're great as you imagine potential and growth. But you're not perfect. There's still work to do on you. There's still competencies, capacities, characters in which you need to build. And coming to grips and honesty with that is a deeply important part of growing. In Christian terms, we've got to confess our sin. We've got to recognize that there are times that we fall short or miss the mark of God's call in our life. And when we do that, we throw ourselves, our world, our families, our surrounding into chaos. If we're going to grow, we have to recognize our capacity for sin, for mistakes, and our shortcomings. The other thing in order to grow that may even be harder than telling the truth about ourselves, the other thing we need to do in order to grow is to embrace the conflict in our story. Now, that's a hard thing to do because nobody likes conflict. I remember when I was in middle school and my English teacher drew that graph on the board that I think most of us have seen at one point or another, the plot line, where it talks about the introduction and the rising action and then the falling action, then the resolution, and draws up like this. And they would say, every story has a plot line, and every story is made interesting by what the conflict is. And I remember hearing that for the first time and thinking, that is wrong, because nobody likes conflict. Who wants to have all the conflict you have in your life and then flip on a TV show or open up a book or watch a movie and experience more conflict that isn't your own problem? Who wants to do that? But here's the thing. That's exactly what makes a story interesting, is conflict. Think about the stories you know in your life. In a vacuum, why would you possibly care about a star war in a galaxy a long time ago in one that's far, far away? Why would you possibly care about that? Except that you were drawn into the conflict of it. You recognized the conflict of that movie and saw yourself in the hero and wanted to celebrate the overcoming of the problem. When I was a kid, I used to play Super Mario Brothers. There's a conflict in Super Mario Brothers. The princess gets stolen by Bowser, and Mario the plumber has to go free her. And every castle he goes into, she's not there. Every movie you like, every TV show you like, every person you like has a story of conflict that they narrate that tells the story of overcoming that conflict. And when you meet a new person, you usually have that very awkward moment where they come up to you and say, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. And you think, I work at a bank downtown. I went to Penn State University. I have 3 kids. And we say facts about ourselves, and it turns into this sort of like exchange of facts, but it's not really compelling or interesting. You don't then think like, oh, they work in a bank. I want to be their friend. Friendships and stories are drawn in when we start telling the stories about the conflict in our life and the ways that we've overcome. Our capacities and competencies come out of the trials and the traumas in our life that have shaped and formed us, in which we can then name how we become a better person on the other side. We become interested in each other and speakers and stories when the conflict seems unmanageable and painful, and they can tell you about the conflict and they can tell you about how they overcame it. When someone gets up and starts talking about how they were raised by a single mother and they never had food on their table, and how they overcame financial and parenting issues as a child in order to go off in college and make something of themselves, we draw ourselves in. We hear about that conflict and we think, oh, how did they do it? When we meet someone who has overcome abuse to find forgiveness and joy in their life, we lean in and say, well, how did they do that? When someone starts telling their story, when they really tell you who they are, they begin to name the conflicts in their life. That's an opening up of who I am. And narrating how it is we've gotten to the other side is when we begin to draw close to one another and really lean in to want to learn more. This is deeply ironic because none of us like conflict. We don't ever want to go back to those moments of our childhood of incredible pain. We don't want to relive the worst moments of our life. And we certainly hope that the worst moments of our life aren't in our future. We hope they're in our rearview mirror. But at the same time, it's in those moments of intense and incredible conflict, unbelievable pain, real fear, uncertainty of how basic needs were going to be provided. It is in those moments that we have found ourselves growing. It is in the conflict. It is the times that we have gone through conflict in our story and not just skirted around it, pretending like it's not there. Those are the moments that our personhood, our character, our strength has been formed and shaped and built. We grow in our moments of biggest struggle. And so in order to grow, we have to be a people who can admit that we're not perfect and also embrace the conflict in our stories. I'm not saying you have to like it. I'm not saying you have to have fun with it. I'm not saying you have to go looking for it. No emails this week about how you started an argument with your spouse so that you can have low conflict in your life to make it interesting, okay? It's not what I'm talking about. But it's in our moments of struggle and suffering and hurt that God does an incredible work to partner with us, to lead us through it, and to build who we are through it as well. Now, the theme verse, which was on the video that we read earlier that I'm going to use, is from Romans chapter 5, and it talks very much about this. It says, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings." We do what now? No, that doesn't sound right. Can I get a different version where it says something like, not only so, we also don't have sufferings? No, it says we glory in our sufferings. That's an interesting thing to say. We glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Each of the next 3 weeks of this month, I'm going to talk about each shift and how each thing creates the next competency. And we don't want to suffer. We'll do everything we can to avoid suffering. When we are suffering, when I am suffering, often my prayers often look like bartering and bargaining with God. You want more money? You want more time? What do I need to do for you to take this away from me? We do not want to suffer. But Paul, who wrote Romans, knew a thing or two about suffering. Beatings, jail time. He comes out on the other side saying that suffering produces perseverance. I don't know about you. That's my sermon this week. Suffering produces perseverance. That doesn't feel like good news to me. I don't want to suffer. I'd like to be able to persevere when things are bad, but perseverance doesn't sound like very much fun either. I've told you before in sermons that I hate being patient. Like when I read the fruit of the Spirit, it says love, check, joy, check. Yeah, I like those things. And then it gets to patience, and I'm like, yeah, what spirit? Fruit of, no. I don't want that. I'll take love and joy. That sounds good. I'll be a peacemaker. It's cool, but patience. I hate being patient. And so being patient is hard for me. Persevering is hard for me. I want to fix things. I want to see the struggles in my life and the life of those around me and just say, well, what are the 3 steps for us to get this done? Persevering doesn't sound like very good news for me. In fact, I think my mom knew this was the case with me. And, my mom's goal as a mother of me was to raise a man, right? She didn't want me to be one of those leeches on society living in her basement. She wanted me to grow up. And one of the ways in which to grow up was to build competencies. And one of them is perseverance. And I wasn't going to build perseverance on my own, I'll tell you that much. And so I have ADHD, and one of the things about ADHD is that clutter shuts my brain off. Now, if the kitchen is picked up and there's dishes to be done and it needs to be wiped down, I can clean. Cleaning is not a problem for me. Picking up is hard. I see clutter and my brain matches the clutter. I don't even know what the first thing to do. I need someone to just say to me, you pick up the dishes, Tim. I can do one step at a time, but I cannot fix a mess. And so when I was younger, my mom would pick days, Saturday, say, where we had nothing going on, and she would get me in the morning, 8 a.m., and say, Tim, you're going to clean your room today. She and I both knew what this meant at 8 a.m. It meant that at 8 p.m., she and I would clean my room together. She knew this, I knew this. And I always wanted to just fast forward and just say, come on, we know where this is going. Why don't we just do it and get it done with? And she'd say, no, you have to develop some responsibility for yourself. You need to learn to maintain your own space. I couldn't do it. My room wasn't that messy and it wasn't that big. But I would sit in my room for 5 hours, 7 hours, 9 hours, nothing getting done and probably it getting worse. My mom would check in and say, you're not done until it's clean to my standards. Whatever that means. And she'd keep coming back until it was 8 p.m. and then we'd do it together. Because she wanted my room clean and she was willing to help me, but if she helped me every time and never let me suffer, never let me struggle, she would just be enabling me. And her goal, even though she knew this was a hard thing for me, was for me to have to sit through hard times to develop perseverance. Because in order to be a man, you have to have some perseverance. And she did not want to leave me completely incapable. And sometimes the hard thing about parenting is that you've got to enter into your kids' weaknesses and let them flounder a little bit so they develop competencies. For me, sitting in my room for 12 hours was the very epitome of hell as a child. Like, seriously, if God creates an own personal hell for you to torture you, if you don't accept Jesus, mine will look like sitting in a lonely room for all of eternity with no one to talk to and nothing to do. That would kill me, and it killed me as a child, but the suffering was important so that I built perseverance so that I would become a competent member of society growing up. It would have been very easy to short circuit the suffering, the struggle, the pain on all of us. It was not my mom's idea of fun, checking in on me every 2 hours and seeing nothing done. That was not her definition of fun either. But I had to grow. and I wouldn't grow by my mom doing all my work for me. I think this is what Paul is talking about in this story. Now, that's a pretty low-level amount of suffering. Suffering is way worse in our world than being a little boy and not being able to clean your room. But when conflict comes to your story, we often want God and others to clear all the debris for us so that we have a nice, easy pathway through life. But we can never become mature if everyone's always clearing the debris for us. We can never grow up. We can never become Christ-like. We become these things through the struggles of life, learning perseverance and patience. There's a story that I want to read real quick for you, and this is really kind of leading us home. I'm not getting started and warmed up, I promise. In John chapter 5, of a man who showed incredible perseverance. And I invite you, if you would, to stand with me as we read the word of the Lord from the Gospel of John today. John chapter 5. It says this: sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now, there was in Jerusalem near the sheep gates a pool, which in Aramaic was called Bethesda, and which surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. I want to pause the text for 1 second here. Powerful rabbis like Jesus, when they went up to Jerusalem, went into the holy places to be seen. They went into the elite places. It is noteworthy in ways that we can miss that Jesus, the rabbi, the Son of God, goes up to Jerusalem and goes and hangs out with the lame, the blind, and the ill. This is deeply important for us to understand the heart of Jesus, that instead of going to the place where he could rub elbows with the elite and be seen, he goes up to Jerusalem to celebrate a festival, and he goes and he spends time with the people who are hurting and struggling. This is very important. Moving on. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was the Sabbath, and so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made them well. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. "38 years is a long time. In this story, we have someone who spent 38 years disabled. We're not told what the problem is specifically, but the problem is enough that they could not get themselves from their mat into the pool. The legend around the pool of Bethesda was that at times an angel would come down and stir the water, and if you were to get into the water, preferably first, you would be healed from whatever it was you had come to be healed from. This man spent 38 years being brought to the pool, hoping that he would get into the pool fast enough in order to be healed. Just last month, I turned 40. This man, for almost my entire life's equivalent, has gone to the pool every day, hoping that today would be the day that he was healed. 38 years is a long time. King Henry VIII, he of the many wives, leaving the Catholic Church to become Protestant, leaving the Protestant Church to become Catholic, wanting to get divorces. He was king for 38 years. His story is still told today, 500 years later. He was only king for 38 years. This man in this text came to the pool for as long as King Henry VIII was king. Don Shula, who used to coach in this town, leads the NFL in wins as a coach. His longevity is incredible. He coached for only 33 years. My parents were married for only 31 years before my dad died. 38 years is a long time. And I don't know how you're wired. I don't think I would have made it to year 38. I think I would have given up. 38 years of every day being drugged to a pool, hoping that today would be the day that I got into the pool and was healed. And what's also amazing is that in these 38 years, not one day of these 38 years did anyone else clear the way for him to be the first one in. No one said, hey, I've been coming here for 3 weeks now and I haven't won the race yet, but that guy says he's been coming for 32 years. Maybe we should help him get in first. Maybe today could be his day. Not one day of 38 years did anyone talk the crowd into letting him go first this time. 38 years seemed just as likely to turn into 40, into 50, into 60, until he died. 38 years of hoping today would be the day, and finding out that once again it wasn't. How did he keep doing it? That's a level of perseverance that I don't know. And yet, his suffering was so great, he had to turn somewhere that he would be made well. And this is where he turned time after time after time. 38 years into his hope of getting into the pool, Jesus shows up and has a conversation with him. Do you want to be made well? That seems like an obvious question. What does it look like, idiot? I'm at the pool of Bethesda. I'm not on Long Beach, Los Angeles. I want to get healed. I want to get healed. And Jesus says, take up your mat and walk. And 38 years of waiting is undone the moment that Jesus speaks. One of the questions that the text begs that it doesn't ask is, why did he have to wait 38 years? Why didn't Jesus, who was the Son of God the day he was born, and before that even, why didn't he sneak over there when he was 16 and this guy's suffering? Why was he let to suffer 38 years? 38 years. It's an incredibly long time. And so often when we're caught in suffering, we get caught in the length of how long our suffering has been. And we begin to narrate it as unfair and unkind, and a loving God would see me and answer my prayer and would fix it. Why do I keep suffering? And it's a fair question. But this person was so thrilled to be healed that the day he was healed, it was right on time. The power of God was shown in his life. He learned perseverance, and his hope was answered. Healing came not in the way he expected, but it came when Jesus made his appearance to him. Jesus saw him, spoke to him, and healed him. There's another story just a couple chapters later that asks this question more explicitly. There's a blind man, and people want Jesus to teach them on why he was blind. They said, teacher, is he blind because he sinned or because his parents sinned? That's pretty consistent with a lot of our theology today. Oh, bad things are happening to you. What did you do to make God mad? What did you do to deserve this? Oh, they're really reaping what they sow. Maybe if they'd made better choices, things would work out for them. They're asking that question to Jesus. This man was born blind. Who's the sinner? And Jesus says, what? This is not a consequence of personal sin. That's not what happened there. It's not like Jesus is saying they're not sinners. He's saying bad things aren't happening because of their sin. It's not an easy equation like that. But Jesus says This has happened so that the works of God might be displayed in them. For those of us who want to grow, leaning into our suffering is hard to do. We want out of it. We want our way cleared. We want our pathway to be easy. We don't want to have bad times. But for those of us who yearn to grow, and to yearn to grow in Christian character, we can join with what Paul says in Romans to say, this is awful. I am suffering. This is not fair. But God can show his glory in some way through my suffering. It might be when he shows up and heals you, and your testimony becomes the power of God in this world where it seemed like there was no way. It could be in the shaping of your character that you become a person who perseveres. And perseverance produces character within you, that you grow as a person and become the kind of person that God yearns to shape you to be. It could be that God, through character, creates hope, that you experience his love in a way that becomes personal to you. But what we learn about growing, if we want to grow, especially if we want to grow in Christ, if we want to grow, we cannot shirk the conflict of this world. We can't go around it. A person who has had a life with no conflict is a hard person to be around. A person who pretends that every conflict in their life is someone else's fault is hard to be around. But a person who wants to grow in character, a person who wants to grow in Christ-likeness, a person who wants to become mature in faith, needs to let God shape them in the moments of conflict. We need to recognize, to look for, and to see where God is acting in the midst. And be ready, even if it takes 38 years, to respond to Jesus when he comes into town and asks you, do you want to be made well? I'm talking each of these weeks about the movement of growth in this text in Romans. And I'm not real excited about perseverance. I don't know that any of you came today and thought, I hope the pastor preaches on me becoming more of a perseverer. But there is good news coming. Perseverance is step one out of suffering. Next week, we're going to talk about character, that perseverance produces character. And I'll just show you a graph real quick as the band comes of what that looks like. This is something I borrowed. I think it's really good. Your values are your ideas about how things should be and what matters to you. Your values may shift and shape in life. You probably value things now that you didn't value when you were 7 or even 10 years ago, right? Values can shift and change. But these are your ideas of how things should be and what matters to you. Principles are the rules you follow to make sure you are living your values. Values and principles are good things. They're good things to have. But really what we want to shape is this last one of character. The strength to which you adhere to your principles. That you are who you say you are. That you are shaped through the trials of this life. That when hard times come, your values and your principles are not shaken because your character is formed in Christ. That you can be the person that God wants you to be through hard times, even if God is not answering your prayers as quickly or on the timeline that you have. We can enter into our struggles anticipating that we have a great hope in Christ for him to redeem our moment and to redeem our world and to make all things right eventually. But through those struggles, through the hard times, we are shaped by him to live according to his will and purpose and life in his character, that we might show his glory through the way we live in hard times. This is what growth looks like. We're going to sing a final song called Build My Life. I'm going to invite you to stand with me. If you're yearning for Christ to do something in you through your suffering in this moment, if you're praying for him to show up like at Bethesda to heal you, if you're tired and exhausted and don't anymore want to deal, you can pray for perseverance, that God would help you and give you strength through what you face. But take this time to sing, to seek God, to pray, and to yearn for God to be your help. The altars are open if you'd like to come. Otherwise, join me in singing this final song.